Most people who quit do not quit dramatically. There is no single moment of defeat, no public declaration, no clear line in the sand that can be pointed to afterward as the moment everything changed. It happens quietly, gradually. In the accumulation of small withdrawals, effort reduced here, commitment loosened there, the dream moved from the front of the mind to the back, and then further back still, until one day it is simply no longer something being actively pursued, and the person carrying it has stopped noticing the weight of it because they have been setting it down so slowly for so long. And then something happens. A news story, a chance encounter, a name they recognize in a context that makes the stomach drop. And the weight returns all at once, not the weight of the dream itself, but the weight of the question they have been avoiding since they stopped. What if I had stayed? Marvin knew that weight. He had been carrying it for 2 years when the thing that finally made him stop avoiding the question arrived in his inbox on an otherwise ordinary Wednesday morning. Stay with us, because today we are telling the story of a man who quit the thing he was building one season too early, and what the cost of that decision taught him about the one rule that nobody who has ever built anything worth building has ever been able to afford to break. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe, because somebody out there needs to hear exactly this today. Marvin was 34 years old when he quit. He had been building a food technology startup for 2.5 years, a platform that connected small-scale local food producers directly with restaurants and hospitality businesses, cutting out the layers of distribution that inflated costs for both sides and made it nearly impossible for small producers to compete with large suppliers on price and reliability. The idea was good. Marvin had not arrived at it through inspiration alone, but through 18 months of working inside the hospitality industry and watching the same friction repeat itself. Chefs who wanted to source locally, but could not manage the relationships with dozens of small suppliers, producers who had exceptional products, but no reliable channel to the buyers who would value them. He had built the platform to solve a specific, real, frequently experienced problem. He had confirmed the problem existed before he built the solution. He had done, in other words, many of the things that entrepreneurs are supposed to do. The platform launched. The early traction was real, not explosive, but real. 14 restaurants signed up in the first 3 months, 22 producers. The feedback was positive in the way that genuine utility generates positive feedback rather than polite feedback. People were using it. It was saving them time and money in ways they could measure. And then month 7 arrived and the growth slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. The rate of new signups that had characterized the first 2 quarters dropped in the third. Marvin told himself it was a natural plateau following early adopter enthusiasm, the well-documented dip between early adopters and mainstream adoption that every market-based platform encountered. He adjusted his outreach strategy. He invested time in partnerships with hospitality associations that he believed would open new channels. Month 8 was similar to month 7. Month 9 was worse. The funding conversation that Marvin had been building toward, a small seed round that would have allowed him to hire a dedicated sales person and expand to a second city, collapsed when the lead investor pulled back citing market uncertainty. Without the funding, the expansion was not possible on the timeline he had projected. Without the expansion, the metrics he needed to attract alternative funding were not achievable on the timeline investors expected. He was in the gap. The particular, grinding, soul-eroding gap between a thing that was working and a thing that was working enough, where the evidence of viability was real, but not yet sufficient to generate the momentum that would make it undeniably real. He had been in the gap for 4 months when he quit. It was not a decision made in a moment of despair. It was a decision made in a moment of exhaustion, the specific exhaustion of a person who has been giving everything to something for 2.5 years and has run out of the reserves required to keep giving at that level without a clearer signal that the giving was taking them somewhere. He had a job offer. A good one, a senior role at a hospitality tech company that was growing quickly and had sought him out specifically because of what he had built. The salary was real. The stability was real. The relief of handing the uncertainty to someone else for a while was real. He took the job. He shut the platform down. He told himself it was the right decision. He told himself this consistently, and with the practiced conviction of someone who needs to believe something in order to function. He was good at the new job. He applied himself to it with the same intensity he had brought to his own venture, and was rewarded with the recognition that competent, driven people receive in well-run organizations. And underneath all of it, quietly and persistently, was the question he was not asking out loud. The Wednesday morning email arrived 26 months after he had shut the platform down. It was a newsletter from a hospitality industry publication he had subscribed to years earlier and never unsubscribed from. The subject line contained the name of a platform he did not recognize. He opened it with the mild, unfocused attention of someone processing a morning inbox. The platform was doing what his platform had done. Local food producers, restaurants, direct connection, distribution costs removed. It had launched 8 months after Marvin had closed his. It was operating in the same city he had started in. And it had, according to the article, just closed a seed round of £400,000 and was preparing to expand to 3 new cities. Marvin read the article twice. Then he sat very still for a long time. He was not reading about a competitor who had beaten him. He was reading about a successor who had arrived 8 months after he left and found exactly the market he had been building toward, the market that had been forming slowly during the months he had experienced as stagnation, that had reached the tipping point of readiness shortly after he had decided the timing was wrong. He had quit 4 months before the gap closed. The question he had been avoiding for 2 years arrived in full and without mercy. What if I had stayed? He did not spend long in that question, not because it was not painful but because he understood, with the clarity that comes from the outside of a decision rather than the inside of it, that the question had only one productive use. Not as a source of regret to be carried, as a lesson to be extracted and applied. What he had experienced in month 9 and month 10, and the months that followed had not been evidence that the platform was not working. It had been the gap, the normal, predictable, entirely documented period of resistance that precedes mainstream adoption in almost every market-based product. He had not had the framework to recognize it as normal. He had experienced it as failure. And in the absence of the framework that would have told him what he was actually inside, he had made the decision that the absence of visible progress justified. He had not been failing. He had been 4 months from breaking through. Marvin stayed in his job. He was not in a position to walk away from it immediately, and he was honest enough with himself to recognize that another venture required the kind of preparation he had not done thoroughly enough the first time. But he began, quietly and deliberately, preparing for the next one, not from the naive enthusiasm of a first attempt, from the seasoned, sober, considerably more expensive education of someone who had learned the hardest lesson entrepreneurship teaches. The breakthrough is almost always on the other side of the moment that feels most like a reason to stop. 2 years later, Marvin launched again. A different idea, better researched, better funded, better supported by a network he had spent the intervening time deliberately building. And when the gap arrived, as it always does, he recognized it, sat in it, kept moving. He did not quit. Nobody knows exactly how close they are. This is the brutal and beautiful truth of building anything in conditions of uncertainty, that the distance between where you are and where the breakthrough lies is not visible from where you are standing. The gap looks the same whether the other side is 4 months away or 4 years away. The exhaustion feels the same. The doubt sounds the same. The case for stopping is equally convincing whether you are at the beginning of the hard part or the end of it. The people who eventually break through are not the ones who feel less doubt in the gap. They are the ones who have decided in advance, as a matter of principle rather than a response to how things feel in any given moment, that the gap is not a signal to stop. It is the territory that must be crossed, every time, without exception, because the breakthrough does not come before the gap. It comes after it. Marvin quit 4 months before the market was ready for what he had built. He spent 2 years carrying the weight of that knowledge. The lesson it left him was the only one that mattered. You do not know how close you are, so you do not stop. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.